U.S. President Obama announced Monday that his Defense Secretary, Chuck Hagel, was resigning. Many here in Washington wondered what was behind the move. Did Hagel go willingly, or was he pushed? By the United States Armed Forces are engaged in combat on more than one front, from its fight against ISIL in Iraq and Syria to the U.S.-led war in Afghanistan. What, if anything, will change now that Hagel is on his way out? We start with CCTV's Nathan King. And Nathan, Chuck Hagel is leaving his post less than 2 years after being appointed. Was it his decision, or was he fired?
Well, the Washington consensus, Anand, is that he was definitely pushed. You know, the ink was barely dry on the resignation announcement, and basically the same anonymous sources, of course, from the White House, basically putting the message all over town that it was the president's decision for Chuck Hagel to go. Now, the big question, of course, is why? Was it because his job had changed? Remember, he was brought in as a Republican, bipartisan, but against the war in Iraq, to wind down that war in Iraq, wind down Afghanistan, cut the army to pre-9/11 levels, sort out the rebalance to Asia. And of course, in the last 2 years, his job changed. There were chemical weapons use in Syria, the Russian standoff with the West over Ukraine, and the rise of ISIL in Baghdad and Syria as well. Or was it something personal? Was it because he wasn't a good communicator? Remember those bruising confirmation hearings he had before he even got the job? He wasn't good in press conferences, and he sort of shied away from a spotlight, which is one of the big cabinet jobs as well. So there are lots of debates about why, but the president's men very much saying that it was his decision.
Nathan, at that announcement at the White House when President Obama told us that his Secretary of Defense was leaving, he had some really nice things to say about Chuck Hagel. Let's watch.
When I nominated you for this position, you said that you'd always give me your honest advice and informed counsel. You have. When it's mattered most, behind closed doors, in the Oval Office, you've always given it to me straight.
Do we know, Nathan, whether Chuck Hagel was happy in his role, or was there tension between the two men?
You know, the two men were friends. You know, President Obama didn't have many friends in Washington. He was only a one-term senator. Hagel was a senator, one of the few people he knew in the defense establishment as well. So he really wanted to be on. And you could see in the body language, even after the resignation, that they got on. The big problem is that he was a Republican and may not have gone on with the National Security Council, which, of course, is in the White House, run by former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Susan Rice, a close confidant of Barack Obama. And the tale here in Washington is that they did scrap over policy, especially when it came to ISIL. Chuck Hagel questioned, like some allies had, about whether they should go over President Bashar al-Assad in Syria as well as ISIL. That debate, of course, natural. But it was a bone of contention, apparently, between the White House and the Pentagon as well. But it may have been just a case of the policy may not be working, so let's have the sacrificial lamb, which happens a lot, as you know, not just in Washington, but around the world. And that happened to be Chuck Hagel, especially after a bruising midterm election nightmare for the Democrats.
And Nathan, of course, now we're looking ahead to who will possibly replace Chuck Hagel. What other names are coming up?
Well, we've had a few names. Michelle Flourney was one of them. She was the previous #3 at the Pentagon, but we learned just before we went on air that she's actually withdrawn her name. We've also seen Senator Jack Reed from Rhode Island under consideration. He's withdrawn his name as well. But remember, this is not a great job. We have a lame duck presidency, just 2 years left. Of course, the U.S. defense establishment was expecting to be drawing down out of Iraq, drawing down out of the Middle East, and now they're ramping up as well. So it's a kind of thankless task. And of course, you're also going to have to set the stage for another president coming in as well. And that, of course, could be the former Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. So there's a lot of work to do for any Secretary of State going in.
CCTV's Nathan King, thank you very much.